Welcome to Sustainability in the Air, the world's first podcast dedicated to sustainable aviation. This show is brought to you by SimpliFlying, which has been helping build trust in travel for over a decade. Through in-depth conversation with aviation leaders, sustainability in the air breaks through the current clutter and provides a clear roadmap for the future. It's about time we embarked on creating a net zero future for the industry, together. This season of the podcast is brought to you by Carbon Click, leaders in managing carbon offsetting programs for top global airlines. Without further ado, here is your host, Shashank Nigam, CEO of SimpliFlying.
On this final episode of Sustainability in the Air, Season 2, instead of getting an external guest, I thought, why not have a chat with SimpliFlying's own in-house expert on all things sustainability, and that is Dirk Singer, who's been our Director of Research, our Head of Sustainability, and has been leading our twice-weekly newsletter. If you haven't read it yet, you must be under a rock somewhere. Please come out. It's one of the best reads on sustainability. And Dirk, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Shashank.
So, Dirk, in one of your latest newsletters, actually, the white paper you recently published, it's on greenwashing. And one of the things you highlighted is in September, airlines faced a huge backlash from activists around Europe who put up billboards everywhere accusing airlines of greenwashing. Now, is this a one-off or is this a trend? Because it's quite scary if I put myself in an airline executive's shoes here.
So if you remember about 2 years ago, just before COVID hit, when we were first getting involved in the sustainability space, we put out a blog post, which sort of was a watch out to the aviation industry, which was entitled, Big Tobacco Yesterday, Big Oil Today, Big Aviation Tomorrow, which is that the parameters of what is socially acceptable are shifting, and that that very, very soon aviation will be put under the same spotlight as a sort of fossil fuel industry such as oil and gas had been in the past, and this is really a sort of a sign of that coming to life, in that activist groups are starting to target the aviation industry in the same way that not so long ago they were, and they are still, targeting oil companies. And of course, what they did, the action that you're referring to, is in 15 European cities, is a group of activist groups that was partially drawn from ex-advertising agency people. So they were creative industry types who put this together. Was they subverted, the poster billboards that you see in major cities. And a number of airlines were targeted. So ITA Airways in Italy, for example, was targeted, and they changed their logo to a pterodactyl dinosaur type thing. Lufthansa was targeted with a picture of a man reading a magazine about trees, while outside the window, sort of the world was burning. And they changed the sort of Lufthansa's marketing slogan in 2018, "Say yes to the world." They changed it to "Say yes to the end of the world." And British Airways was targeted, where they did a mock-up of a BA business class cabin, and they made a joke about BA having the world's first in-flight golf course with a sustainable golf ball, which was obviously taking aim at the fact that, obviously that passengers per carbon footprint is higher in business class than in economy. And so, these are the type of tactics that we used to see against oil companies. And now the airline industry is starting to come into the frame from these groups.
It's very scary, once again, just from a airline PR or reputational perspective. But I remember having an airline CEO on the show earlier this season who clearly said, listen, aviation makes up maximum 3%, maybe 3.5% of total emissions, and we are doing the best we can to reduce it. Should airline executives be concerned? Do you think this response still holds true today?
I think that the only 3% response is very dangerous and it's wrong. And obviously we should be warning aviation industry executives against using it wherever possible, really for two reasons. First of all, it is not a very good line to take. It doesn't really work to say, well, what about agriculture, or what about construction, what have you? There's an argument to say it shouldn't really matter what other industries are doing. It doesn't absolve you of your responsibility. Look over there is not a very good defense to use. That's point number one. Point number two is, of course, is what climate activists claim, and this is backed up by data, is that aviation growth is outstripping the incremental, um, uh, you know, uh, savings and efficiencies that are being made by more fuel efficient aircraft. I mean, I believe that Boston Consulting Group, put out a report saying that by 2050, if things carry on their current trajectory, aviation wouldn't account for 3% of emissions; they would account for 20% of emissions, because, of course, most of the world currently does not fly. As more people fly, those emissions will go up. And the industry is one that's focused on growth. So for those two reasons, I don't think that the only 3% argument is either advisable or really is one that you can defend.
Sure, I think definitely the arguments need to evolve, but one of the important things, once again, talking to airline executives, I get the feel is, hey, these climate activists are never going to fly us anyway. So why should I care if it's not my customer, right? I'm having business travelers back on the planes. I'm having premium economy that's full. Demand is high. Yield is high. Why should I care? Why should airline executives care? What do these climate activists want?
I guess sort of number one is that obviously that climate change is an issue that affects all of us. So hopefully, a socially responsible CEO and organization should care because it's the right thing to do as a good corporate citizen. But secondly, I think it's sort of, from a communications point of view, you have to look at, who are we talking to? And you're right. I mean, so the likes of Extinction Rebellion, for example, will never be convinced, of the arguments. I mean, they believe that absolutely everything done by the aviation industry is greenwashing, and the only way to the only solution in their eyes is to stop people flying, as much as possible. But beyond them, you're talking to a wider audience, and there's copious amounts of research that shows that that more and more consumers are aware that climate change is a critical issue, and that's being brought home now in the global north. I mean, obviously, in the global south has been for the brunt of climate change. In the global north, we had record temperatures last summer, and it's becoming real to a lot of consumers around the world now, in richer countries who do fly. And of course, you need to talk to the wider audience that you are. That you share their concerns and that you are doing your part to help aviation decarbonize. And of course, the solutions are there. It's just a question of, cost, incentives, and and a possible route forward.
A route forward. Which airlines? Now I've had Scott Kirby from United come and share what United is doing. I've had Tony Douglas from Etihad come and share. I've had Qatar Airways, Akbar Al Bakr share, what they're doing. I've even had Fiji Airways talk about local conservation efforts and how they're promoting the preservation of their ecosystem. Really talk about this. Now, which airlines do you believe are doing a good job, and what is it that they're doing differently?
Well, I mean, you mentioned that United Scott Kirby, and I think that that's a good example of a CEO who is actually engaged with the topic and is able to talk about it fluently. You also mentioned, Tony Douglas, I guess ex-Etihad now, but I mean, I remember, attending the launch of their A350 route from Heathrow back in May, and I think the two things out of Etihad really impressed me when I heard Tony Douglas speak is that, first of all, he was able to talk about the topic with knowledge, which a lot of CEOs aren't. But secondly, is that he didn't minimize the challenge. He talked about the flight that they took with their Greenliner, whether they used SAF or whether they took a different route, what have you. And he was honest about the fact that you can't replicate this on every single flight. It was a one-off that they did to show it was possible, but on a day-to-day basis right now, it is not possible to do that. And I appreciated the honesty and the frankness that he did when he was talking. But also when we went on board, with some journalists on board the Etihad aircraft, was the fact that cabin crew were able to, talk about sustainability and had internalized the message that this is important. So yes, so those two airlines. I guess also EasyJet. EasyJet recently brought out, an accelerated net zero program, which did win a certain amount of plaudits, from some climate change activists. And one of the things that I found significant was that EasyJet was invited to sit in a panel with Transport Environment, which is a Brussels-based think tank, which has been quite hard on the aviation industry. Now, obviously, EasyJet is putting a lot of scope on, hydrogen aircraft and next generation aircraft being a big chunk of its of the net zero pie by 2050. Whether that comes to pass is, I guess, remains to be seen. But I don't think that their ambition, can be faulted in putting some real metrics behind it. Then other airlines are, are starting to engage with with the Science-Based Targets Initiative, which is a global body which audits your targets. I mean, Air New Zealand are doing that, American Airlines, Delta, KLM, Air France. I mean, obviously KLM is very active in sustainability anyway. EasyJet, and they essentially audit your targets to make sure that they are realistic, and that it isn't just greenwashing, so to speak, and something that you've just made up yourself.
Exactly. Now, I remember one of the airlines you mentioned is Etihad, of course. And I remember you had been on their green A350 demonstrator in London. And I remember you being very impressed by the knowledge of the flight attendants and the crew around the sustainability initiatives as well. Is that tell us a little about that?
Well, I mean, sort of the flight attendants, the cabin crew. Obviously, they had been specially chosen, for the demonstration flight, and knowing that there were media on board, but that they were able to answer a number of questions, about sustainability, and that they'd internalized the messaging, that Tony Douglas had brought through the organization, and that was indeed impressive to see that, that sustainability was something sort of that flowed through all of Etihad, rather than just being, restricted to one or two people or to a sustainability department.
It seems that airlines are doing quite a bit. No one's just sitting still. Yet, they keep suffering greenwashing claims. Why does the climate change movement think that aviation is not serious in decarbonizing?
So I think you maybe have to take a step backwards and to look at what climate change activists want. And obviously, we're talking about a lot of overlapping groups. You have the likes of Greenpeace, which is quite well established, and if you like, in the mainstream movement. And then you have more radical groups such as Extinction Rebellion, which believes in more direct action, or like here in the UK, Just Oil, who of course made the news when they did that Van Gogh painting stunt at the National Gallery the other month. But generally, I mean, they they believe in two things. To a certain extent, they think that that overconsumption and an excessive consumer lifestyle is partially responsible for the climate crisis, and they think that a solution is for consumers, especially in the global north, to cut down. Now, aviation is seen as one of the pinnacles of that, because obviously there are these very stats around that that the highest demographic is responsible for the largest share of flights and the largest share of emissions. So that's the first thing. They see aviation as as a sign of overconsumption. The second thing is that they don't believe that the industry is serious. They point to years worth of missed targets. I mean, there was a climate group called Possible, which released a study in June, which got a lot of coverage, where they claimed that 49 out of the 50 airline targets that they had looked at from 2000 to 2020 had either been missed or just sidelined, or just delayed. So as far as climate change groups are concerned, the aviation industry talks a good game, but it doesn't always back it up with reality. And then, there is this school of thought that really we need to cut back on overconsumption, which means that we need to cut back on what they see as as excessive and needless flying.
Two airlines that have suffered because of this, approach from climate activists are KLM and Austrian. Now, tell us a little what exactly happened here, because you've of course done in-depth research on both of these cases.
Yeah, I mean, there are obviously two different instances. I mean, as far as KLM was concerned, they were taken to court. I mean, I believe that this is still ongoing, on claims from climate change activists that their Fly Responsibly campaign amounted to greenwashing, because chiefly it comes down to the fact that the activists say that KLM is focused on growth. Which means that, as they see it, it's going to increase its emissions, and that a company which wants people to fly more, as they see it, cannot be making claims such as carbon neutral flying. In the case of Austrian released a promotion over the summer for the Venice Biennale Festival, where they said that you could fly climate neutral. And what this involved was passengers had to, offset their flights with sustainable aviation fuel credits, if you like. And then you also got free public transport in Venice and free public transport in Vienna, so at both ends. And they were taken to the Austrian ad regulator, which ruled against Austrian Airlines for that and said that, said two things. First of all, obviously, sustainable aviation fuel, technically speaking, isn't, climate neutral flying, because at the moment, the highest rate of biofuels is that, is that it's an 80% reduction in emissions, not 100%. And secondly, they said that, that consumers obviously don't know what these things mean anyway. And I think that second point is fair. If we walked outside onto the street, you in Whistler and me in London, and you ask people what sustainable aviation fuel, ask them what SAF is, nine out of 10 people would have no clue. And I think that there is, it is valid to say that in the industry that we do, throw around terms such as SAF, or make claims such as climate neutral or carbon neutral flying, which are quite vague, and which can and will be challenged by activists.
One of the things I feel looking at this is climate activists often use lawsuits as marketing. The moment there's a lawsuit against an airline, it's a lot of publicity for them, right? Should airlines be scared? Should airlines be concerned that they might face a lawsuit in the future?
Yes, I mean, sort of, you're right in what you say. That sort of the main goal is to shift the narrative and to influence the public. And one way that you do that is by generating media coverage. And most climate change groups, that is their aim, sort of to do high profile stunts or high profile activity and to get it covered in the media. And the chances are, even if it's not successful, if you take an airline to court, especially about greenwashing, because it kind of fits into a media narrative about corporations trying to pull the wool over people's eyes, the chances are, you'll get quite a lot of coverage off the back of it. And that's certainly what happened in KLM's case. I mean, I guess that, sort of that we have to look at that as a fact of life. We live in democratic societies, and and I'm sure that none of us would want to live in a society where groups weren't able to take the lawful, obviously, tools at their disposal to sort of try and influence public opinion and to get their arguments across. And I guess that sort of that the onus is on airlines really as well, is to do what they can to not put themselves in that position. I mean, to take Austrian Airlines sort of case, not to make vague claims about climate neutral or carbon neutral, which don't really stand up in the light of day, and which can be challenged.
Right. I think that's an important nuance you mentioned. Now, you'll remember we were on this call together recently with an airlines team, airline sustainability team, and when I asked her, "So, what is your sustainability plan?" and she says, and I asked her, "What are some of the industry leading initiatives you're taking?" Her response was, "Well, have you seen what happened to KLM?" And when I asked her, "What do you mean?" she says, "Look at the lawsuit they're facing. So we are not going to take any industry leading initiatives. In fact, we will just do what IATA says, what our overarching airline alliance decides. We will not do anything that is, we won't color outside the lines, let's just say. And we will just toe the line when it comes to everything that's sustainability related." And that really is green hushing, which is the opposite of greenwashing, where airlines and executives would rather not say anything or not claim anything for the fear of facing a lawsuit. But I feel that's even more detrimental to the industry if airlines don't do anything or don't say anything about their efforts. What do you say?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I would say, first of all, sort of relying on, things such as CORSIA or IATA guidelines solely is a mistake anyway, because that should be seen as a floor and not as a ceiling. But also, I mean, I would make two further points. That first of all, pressure from climate change groups is not going to go away. If anything, it is going to become more prevalent. As especially as younger demographics who care more about climate change as they start to grow up. I mean, Generation Z. You're already talking about people in their 20s, and there's lots of research, that says that that generation is the most concerned about climate change. Now, those people are the frequent flyers of sort of in 10 or 20 years' time. So you have to engage with the topic because it's not going to vanish. It's just going to increase. And also, by saying nothing, you lose the chance to, sort of to tell your story. Obviously, hopefully, you actually have a story to tell. But but by keeping quiet, you're not heard.
Right. Now you've of course recently released a white paper, a guide to avoiding the greenwashing trap for airlines. What are some of the tips we've put in there, on how airlines can do this right?
Yeah, I mean, we've really focused on, on two main principles. And the first one is, we call it tell your story. And the second one is, don't mark your own homework. And when it comes to telling your story, it is rather than, relying on things such as, sweeping statements such as carbon neutral and climate neutral, bring to life a little bit what you're doing. And an example of that is United. I mean, United do this very, very well. And United, for example, have invested or, have sort of signed contracts with a SAF company called Fulcrum Bioenergy, which basically turns household trash into sustainable aviation fuel. They have a plant outside, I believe, Reno, Nevada, which is currently in operation, and it collects landfill waste, it collects household waste, and there's a process and turns into SAF. And they have, and they've got posters saying, this is how we turn your trash into SAF. And that's very, very good because it brings it to life for the consumer. You can imagine it. You can imagine, sort of putting your rubbish away. Dump truck picks it up. It goes to the rubbish truck. Something happens to my trash. It doesn't just put in a landfill. It's turned into SAF. But that poster doesn't have anything about, carbon neutral, climate neutral, sort of 100%, sort of effects removed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It ties on, telling the story of what is happening. A lot of what is happening is very, very interesting. If we take, for example, electric aircraft. So if we take, for example, sort of hard aviation or hard aerospace rather, United and Air Canada have invested in hard aerospace. Now, I would say that's potential to tell the story. So in 2030, where are these aircraft going to be flying? What does it mean for you as the passenger? What will the experience be like? So, for example, these aircraft are largely silent. Will it rejuvenate a lot of community airports, which of course electric aviation has the potential to do? So there's a huge scope for storytelling that airlines can really go there. So that is point one. The second point that we call, not marking your own homework, which is that if you release targets or if you release stats, you have to have a credible third party standing behind it, especially if you're challenged. Now, a number of organizations are doing that. We've mentioned the Science Based Targets Initiative, where you submit your targets for audit by a panel of experts, and then obviously you have various milestones that you have to meet. And that's one organization. There are other ones like Rebel is a Dutch company who are working with the immunity kit manufacturer Formia to validate their whole product life cycle and to stand behind that that they are actually doing what they say that they're doing.
One of the things is, if you look at storytelling, this is not new. Airlines, manufacturers, they've been doing this for a long time. I remember ATR, for example, on how their pitch around regional aircraft is always about connecting communities and and rejuvenating ecosystems and rejuvenating airports that are not used. This is not a new message. What is so hard about this? They can do this again.
It isn't a new message, and I think that that there's a tendency to blind people with science, and there's a tendency to almost to exaggerate and to talk about as a carbon neutral, climate neutral, which right now isn't the case, because possibly airlines feel under pressure and feel that they should be making these messages. You mentioned ATR. ATR is of course a very good example. They at Farnborough they gave a presentation that I thought was excellent because it married together those two messages. On one hand, they had stats to show about the benefits to to regional communities in the global south and places like the Philippines, let's say the Philippine Islands. If there's an increase in regional traffic, it benefits tourism, it benefits inward investment, it benefits the local economy. This isn't about rich people in the global north flying around. This is has a real transformative effect on a lot of communities worldwide. But they married that with with statistics showing that obviously they've done a successful test of one of the aircraft with 100% SAF and a roadmap of how their the ATR 72 and other aircraft in their in their product lineup would soon be certified to fly with 100% sustainable aviation fuel, and of course some of the fuel efficiencies that you can have if you fly with turboprop aircraft. And I thought that's very, very good, and they told the story, and they emphasized the benefits, and of course we all believe there are benefits in aviation, but they didn't minimize the environmental impact and instead showed how they were making a difference.
Yeah, that I think that's a very important point. It's been done before. Interestingly, I was once having a chat with the chief marketing officer, and he was almost apologetic that his next presentation at a conference is about sustainability because he was, falling into that greenwashing frame of mind. But interestingly, I think the opposite is true. You need people who know communication and marketing to simplify the sustainability message so that it can get far and wide, and there can be some solid storytelling around it that that is emotional, not just here are some stats or here is some new short form that you've never heard of, and dubious claims that are flying over people's heads.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just sort of to take on that point. I mean, one of the, almost a template for how to communicate with, with climate change groups, and how to sort of pitch your message to the wider public, was the recent letter that Ruud Zontag, the sort of the new CEO of Schiphol, sent to Greenpeace and climate change groups, who of course pitched up at Schiphol and did a protest at the private aviation terminal. And obviously we've talked about that on our blog, so if people want to go and see it's on our, it's on our website. But he made a number of points. He wrote an open letter, where he first of all he talked about his own, personal commitment to fighting climate change, which goes back 25, 30 years in his career. He talked about the airport's commitment, the saying that Schiphol would, it has a target to become carbon neutral by 2030, and supports the wider industry's, 2050 aim. He talked about the fact that, that Schiphol connects the Netherlands to 200 destinations worldwide, which is obviously a huge benefit for the Netherlands. But then he said, but it has to be done differently, and that is the important thing. And that is the way that these two messages can run side by side. Yes, it's a huge benefit, but we are not minimizing the environmental impact. And then finally, he said that that activists were welcome as long as obviously they kept it civil, and it was lawful. And that was really a sort of a template and a gold standard of how communication like this should run. Will it make a difference to Extinction Rebellion activists? No, I mean probably not. But again, especially in a country like the Netherlands, where climate change awareness is high, you are communicating with the wider public, which wants to know that you are taking their concerns seriously, and that you're taking the concerns that these groups are presenting seriously as well.
Yeah, what I loved about that letter, Dirk, you're referring to, once again, we'll include that in the show notes, is that he started with a personal story and how he personally, it's not just about turning off lights at home. It's about why is he personally invested in. There was a human touch to this letter rather than a cease and desist coming from a legal department, for example. Um, right? And I think that's what worked in this letter. Now, of course, um, one of the things we are doing on the back of the white paper is we've just announced a greenwashing masterclass on how airlines can deal with greenwashing for next year. Perhaps you can share some details on how we're going to be running that.
Yeah, so we will be, running one of four sustainability communications masterclasses in 2023 for individual airlines and airports, that will have an online module and an in-person module. Obviously, we will look at various things such as sort of the climate change movement, strategies, tactics, what their aims are, why they are saying the things that they're saying. So some of the things we've touched on in this podcast. We'll be looking at examples from outside aviation of greenwashing claims, because obviously this is something that that goes far beyond the aviation industry. And then we'll be doing following that up with an in-person workshop, where we will be looking at an airline or airport's sustainability strategy, and look at how we can sort of package that up into stories and into messaging, that gets across what the airline and airport is doing, without being accused of getting claims of greenwashing.
And who would you say this is for? Because previously we've had master classes which have been very well attended by heads of marketing, heads of communications, heads of digital. Who else do you think should be attending this from airlines and airports and others?
Well, really, it's for a cross section of people, across organizations. I mean, it should even be at a C-suite level. I mean, obviously, we mentioned, that Tony Douglas, someone who's very au fait with the same sustainability space, and that's something that other CEOs and other C-suite executives should seek to emulate. They should seek to copy. I mean, there's the example that you're aware of, that, for example, the Wizz Air CEO was on a panel where he started talking down carbon offsetting, until someone reminded him that his airline actually offers carbon offsetting, and he wasn't aware of that. So it's very, very important that this is internalized at the top of an organization. Obviously, one of our colleagues, Christine Sarkis, she would be involved in that, and she has experience of directly working with CEOs on communication strategies.
Yeah, exactly. I think one of the key components of this masterclass and a key deliverable will be the messages for the C-suite that should be mentioned in every press conference, or when a press person asks, what's your sustainability approach? And what are the specifics that can be mentioned by the C-suite, the CCO or the CEO or the head of the board, because they're the most exposed. It's almost like media training from a sustainability angle.
Absolutely, absolutely, and they will be asked. They will be asked, guaranteed. Almost every single press conference from now on, it will be a topic. Every conference you go to, every exhibition, any kind of sort of public forum, sustainability always comes to the fore. So you're absolutely right that that senior executives and chief executives, they need to be knowledgeable. They need to have a reasonable knowledge about the subject, and they need to know how to communicate, like someone like Ruth Zontag from Schiphol, or Tony Douglas, or Scott Kirby.
Exactly. And it's not just in terms of the audience, right? Why is this masterclass needed and why now, right? The most important thing is, while many airlines might think, oh, we have to target the climate activists or the journalists, but guess what? The most important three sets of customers or audience for these messages are not just activists and journalists, but also your customers. Your customers need to know what the airline is doing today and in 10 years from now. Your shareholders, the airline's shareholders and investors, actually need to know what is being done. Almost every investor call these days, the questions being asked around sustainability strategies are up. So whether you're a legacy airline or a low-cost airline, your investors will want to know what you're doing. And finally, the employees. Don't forget, airlines employ a large amount of people most of the time. And there are thousands of employees who want to know what the airline is doing to make the world greener and fly greener and be better. So there are multiple audiences for these messages too.
Just to expand on that point, I mean, one crucial audience is the corporate market, and the corporate market is one that's becoming increasingly aware of of sustainability pressures, and the need to answer also to investors, shareholders who are in employees, and customers who are asking about sustainability. And Transport and Environment, they started publishing a league table of where they grade 200 major organizations in Europe and North America from A to D, depending on how committed they are to cutting their business travel and employee travel. And some major organizations have made some quite significant commitments. So, for example, Salesforce and Adobe, to take two examples of large organizations, have committed to cutting business travel by between 30 and 50%. Now, that's obviously significant. If organizations start doing that, that is potentially thousands or tens of thousands of seats. And then the flip side of that is that there's an argument to say that with your corporate customers, being more concerned about sustainability, that you will have a competitive advantage if you're able to go to them and you're able to say, we will fly you to San Francisco or to Frankfurt or where have you as before, but here are the steps that we're doing, that you will be able to, to reduce the climate impact of your business travel program by choosing us rather than our competitor.
You're right. I think it is so important. I feel that heading into the next year, greenwashing and getting messaging right on sustainability initiatives is going to be critical for airline executives. It should be a top priority for the board at the board level. Not only what are we doing in terms of our sustainability efforts, but also how are we communicating these efforts to our employees, to our investors, to our customers, and to the general public, including the climate activists, because that's when you truly protect the brand rather than trying something out in a corner. Now, was a special episode, trying to wrap up the conversation we've had all of this season. Dirk, you've of course been sitting into these interviews, most of them with me, as well as writing a lot of reports. What gives you hope about the future of sustainable aviation in the industry? Are you hopeful?
I am hopeful because I think that the technology exists. You've interviewed a number of guests who are doing some groundbreaking things. I mean, to take two examples, obviously Anders Forslund of Heart Aerospace, who has a lot of momentum, a lot of investors, and has a plan to get a 30-seat regional aircraft up and running by the end of this decade. And of course, Val Miftakov of Zero Avia, a UK-US company, which again has very ambitious plans and introducing hydrogen electric technology into regional jets. And obviously, sort of the aim there is that, you could see that, flying in, sort of 80-seat regional jets by early next decade. And I think that companies like that, do give me hope. I mean, obviously, it's not going to make that much of a dent initially into the road to net zero, but I think it's important for a number of reasons. First of all, it's important for the industry for this technology to be proven and to be shown that it works in flight, in a commercial setting. It benefits all of us if that's the case. And secondly, the technology is evolving, and these companies, they have roadmaps to start to move to bigger and bigger aircraft. So it'll make a bigger impact, as time goes on. I mean, obviously, the sort of the biggest factor will have to continue to be sustainable aviation fuel. I read that I think CH Aviation said that there are I think 23,000 commercial aircraft that are still in that are flying today. And as you well know, you've been, I'm sure, on many aircraft that are 30 years old. 2050 is in 28 years time. So out of those 23,000 aircraft, quite a few of them will still be flying in 2050. And for that, the only solution, of course, is drop-in fuels, is sustainable aviation fuel. Now, there, of course, I think one of the positive things is the move from biofuels to power to liquid or e-fuels. And there's a lot of exciting companies in the space like 12, an air company, and also LanzaJet, who are basically sequestering carbon dioxide and process and turning it into SAF. And that's, of course, an unlimited resource, unlike biofuels. So I think that also gives me quite a lot of hope.
I think you are right. I'm seeing, I've had Universal Hydrogen's co-founder, I've had Zero Avia co-founder, and a founder, Val, actually, on this season and the previous season. And I see hydrogen seems hard right now, but the amount of efforts and the funding that is going towards it, I see a fast acceleration. I also see hope in electric, specifically hybrid electric, coming of age with Heart Aerospace ES30. Anders was on my season, on the podcast this season, as well as a few other Magni X powertrain, which they are doing with Harbour Air. Harbour Air CEO was on last season as well. I see hope in the short haul, in the short term with electric, in the medium haul, or sort of longer haul than short haul, with hydrogen, and then, like you mentioned, SAF production is going up. SAF prices are coming down. There are some very innovative models being tested out, like book and claim system, which Etihad piloted with World Energy on COP27, which shows that a flight can be operated completely 100% net zero using the book and claim system for SAF today. It's not 2 years from now, it's not 2050. Today it can be done. So it truly gives me hope. And lastly, just to throw this in, I was really impressed by what Air New Zealand has done, where they have come out and put out a bold claim saying in 2026, we will have a carbon neutral plane in our fleet. And by 2030, we will have a full fleet of those. And then they invited vendors from around the world to help fulfill this mission. And I believe they've had over 30 applicants who have chipped in.
I think, well, if you look at New Zealand, New Zealand is, if you like, the perfect test bed where something like hydrogen would be possible. And obviously one of the challenges, every new technology has certain challenges. And one of the challenges from hydrogen is that you need, airports at both ends, plus emergency airports to be, to have the facility to sort of to take hydrogen powered aircraft. But in New Zealand, you could quite easily create a cluster, for internal flights where that would be possible. So you would think that would be, a good place for that to, for that to happen. I mean, I obviously saw Greg Ferran, the sort of the Air New Zealand CEO, at the recent Apex IFSA Expo in Long Beach. And he was asked about the fact that, that you're not going to have, zero carbon 200-seat aircraft, for a while. And he admitted that. And I thought one of the interesting things with his answer, that he said, well, what you have to do is you have to change the model. And he said, instead of having, two flights with 200-seat aircraft, going from, I don't know, Auckland to Christchurch or wherever it is every day, you have them going a lot more frequently, on 30-seater aircraft, what have you. And he said, treat it like a shuttle, where it goes every half hour, you just get on, and his exact words were, it could be like an Uber, where you just pay as you get on board, it's an hour flight, and you get off, and it just runs backwards and forwards. So certainly what they're doing is very, very interesting. And I thought it was, the thinking was quite innovative, where they thought that, well, okay, how can we introduce, lower emissions flying? And to do that, maybe we change the model of how we're doing things right now.
Absolutely. I think there are definitely green shoots emerging. And I have learned a lot hosting the last 2 seasons. I'm looking forward to hosting the 3rd season in potentially multiple formats in the next year. But thank you, Dirk, for your insights today, for all of your work. For those who have not subscribed yet, please do subscribe to Dirk's twice-weekly newsletter on sustainability. He also publishes a monthly white paper deep dive into all things green aviation. And do visit the SimpliFlying Green Hub at green.simpliflying.com if you haven't yet. Once again, thank you, Dirk. It's always a pleasure chatting.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Sustainability in the Air, the world's first podcast dedicated to sustainable aviation. We hope you liked it and will share it with your network. Please also leave us a review. Awareness is the key to a green future. Your support will help our insights on sustainable aviation reach a wider audience. In addition, for every single listen of this podcast, we will plant a tree. And for every single review, we will plant 50 trees. You can also write to us at podcast@simpliflying.com. And for more content on sustainable aviation, please visit our website, simpliflying.com, and join the movement.